Normally, when a new national team manager walks into their first press conference, we all know exactly how the script goes. They put on a tailored suit, they smile warmly for the flashing cameras, and they deliver a polite, safe speech. They talk about what a massive honor it is, how much they respect the history of the badge, and how the future is blindingly bright. Jürgen Klopp? He sat down at the DFB headquarters in Frankfurt, looked the German media dead in the eye, and essentially threw that script into a woodchipper. This wasn't a standard, comfortable unveiling. This was Klopp setting the terms of engagement. And the very first thing he did was answer a question that has been quietly haunting German football fans for years. Are we still on the same level as France? His answer wasn't a polite sidestep. It was a sledgehammer. When we asked in Germany, are we as good as France? And the answer is no, that's not true. Klopp didn't stop there. He wanted to make sure everyone in the room fully grasped the reality of the situation. He specifically name-dropped 4 of the most terrifying attackers currently wearing the French shirt. If we ask, do we have players like Dembélé, Mbappé, Doué, and Barcola? No, we don't. But we can still beat them. Let's just pause and think about the weight of that. On his absolute very first day on the job, the savior of German football looked at his own country's talent pool and publicly admitted they do not have the firepower of their biggest rivals. He wasn't saying this to be cruel. He was just being ruthlessly blunt. And he didn't just pull those 4 names out of a hat either. Ousmane Dembélé, Kylian Mbappé, Bradley Barcola, and Désiré Doué. Klopp specifically targeted the core of a Paris Saint-Germain squad that had just captured the biggest triumph in their club's history, their maiden Champions League success. Dembélé had literally just finished a season as arguably the best player in Europe, racking up an absurd 46 goal involvements across all competitions and setting up 2 goals in the Champions League final. Barcola was right on his heels with 39 goal involvements, 21 goals and 18 assists. And Mbappé? Well, he doesn't exactly need an introduction. Klopp was making a hyper-specific roster comparison. He was telling the entire country that France has a conveyor belt of elite, world-class individual talent that Germany simply does not possess right now. As you can imagine, dropping a quote like that on day 1 sent shockwaves through the footballing world. Fabrizio Romano had the quotes up on social media within minutes, and the internet immediately split right down the middle. For a massive chunk of the fanbase, this was exactly what they wanted to hear. It was a breath of fresh air. One fan perfectly captured the mood, posting online that it's time to stop comparing Germany to France's superstars and start building a team that can actually defeat them. To them, this was the moment Germany finally started getting its identity back. But inside the room? The tone didn't sit perfectly with everyone. Outlets like Football 365 and Goal.com painted a very different picture of the afternoon. They framed Klopp's approach as almost needlessly combative. Here was a guy who hadn't even run a single training session yet, spending a massive chunk of his unveiling daring the Federation to disagree with him, criticizing the media, and casually threatening to quit the job if certain lines were crossed. What made this whole dynamic even stranger was the guy sitting nearby, DFB President Bernd Neuendorf. Neuendorf had spent weeks moving mountains to get Klopp into this seat. Before Klopp even spoke, Neuendorf was hyping him up to the moon, stating, "We've had very intensive talks in recent weeks. He was our preferred solution from the beginning. We made every effort to bring Jürgen Klopp on board. He is the best solution." So, you have the most powerful man in German football calling Klopp the only acceptable outcome, and less than an hour later Klopp is picking apart the nation's talent pool on live television. It was a masterclass in aggressive expectation management, completely supported by the Federation's heavy hitters. Even DFB Vice President Hans-Joachim Watzke opened his remarks with a fiery, combative statement aimed at the press. It was almost as if the top brass had decided that soft, comfortable press conferences were part of the reason Germany had been failing. To really understand why Klopp felt the need to bring this level of absolute fire to his unveiling, we have to rewind a few weeks to the absolute wreckage of a tournament he was hired to fix. Germany, a proud 4-time World Cup winning nation, went into the tournament with a young manager in Julian Nagelsmann and a squad dripping with proven, top-tier quality. We're talking guys like Kai Havertz, Florian Wirtz, Jamal Musiala, and Jonathan Tah. And yet, they suffered a historically humiliating exit in the round of 32 to underdogs Paraguay. The match itself was pure agony. Germany held the ball for 2 hours. They absolutely dominated the tempo, suffocating Paraguay with 75% possession, but they had absolutely nothing to show for it. Julio Enciso stunned the Germans with a first-half header for the underdogs. Kai Havertz managed to scrape an equalizer off a cross from Florian Wirtz. And then came the controversy. Jonathan Tah looked to have buried a dramatic extra-time winner with a header, only for the referee to rule it out for an alleged foul on the goalkeeper. The game went to penalties, and Germany collapsed. Havertz missed the opening spot kick, and a nation watched its World Cup dreams evaporate yet again. At the time, Klopp was working as a TV pundit for Magenta TV, and he was absolutely livid about the disallowed goal. "If the goal is illegal, then Arsenal won't be English champion," Klopp fumed, calling the entire officiating process poor. But once the red mist faded, Klopp diagnosed the real, underlying disease infecting the national team. "There are 500,000 ways to win a football match. You just have to find one," Klopp noted. "It's one goal, one dream, and it burst. It was dramatic, and Germany didn't function." The aftermath was brutal. A heartbroken Havertz stood in front of the media, apologizing to a country for experiencing the exact same nightmare they had suffered 4 years prior. German legend Jürgen Klinsmann took to ESPN and ripped into the squad's lack of preparation, comparing the disaster to the exits in Russia and Qatar. 3 consecutive World Cups. 3 consecutive failures to reach the round of 16. A nation that used to demand trophies was now just begging to survive the first knockout round. Initially, Julian Nagelsmann firmly refused to resign. And since his contract ran all the way through 2028, getting him out of the dugout required a heavy-handed intervention from the DFB board. But the board didn't hesitate. Nagelsmann was sacked, and the DFB locked on to their dream target. But here is where the story takes a weird, almost theatrical twist. Klopp's shadow had been looming over Nagelsmann long before the Paraguay disaster. During the tournament, Klopp was co-presenting a broadcast alongside Bayern Munich legend Thomas Müller for Germany's opening match against Curaçao. While looking at the starting lineup for what ended up being a 7-goal demolition by the Germans, Klopp let a joke slip. "Luckily, Julian Nagelsmann is still picking the team." Müller, sitting right next to him, instantly caught the implication that Nagelsmann's job security was hanging by a thread, and couldn't help but laugh on air. "Kloppo, we are still in June," Müller shot back. "You are already in September." The clip went viral instantly. It looked like Klopp was already measuring the curtains for Nagelsmann's office. Klopp realized immediately that he had messed up. He later called the word, still, the most hated word of his year, admitting he wanted to punch himself in the face the second it left his mouth. Nagelsmann handled the media circus with a cold, controlled edge, never showing fury but never offering forgiveness either. And even though Klopp apologized profusely, calling it one of the worst days of his life and one of the worst jokes he had ever made, Nagelsmann iced him out. "I did not expect an apology from Jürgen Klopp for his comments," Nagelsmann said later. "And I also don't listen to everybody talking about our team. That's not possible." So, picture the scene in Frankfurt. Klopp is officially taking his dream job, yet he spends a weird amount of time in his opening press conference unprompted, bringing up a month-old broadcast joke, wishing Nagelsmann a happy birthday, and insisting there is no bad blood. He was actively trying to clear the air of a ghost that had already moved on. Once the apologies were done, and the reality check about French superstars was delivered, Klopp finally laid out his master plan. He isn't going to try and turn Germany into a knockoff version of Spain, England, Argentina, or France. He wants them to play the German way. Intense, relentless, and aggressive. Tactically, he was surprisingly specific for day one. He confirmed that he intends to use a traditional four-man defense and play without-and-out wingers. What I've retained from the World Cup is that the back four was effective, and that's what we'll do too, Klopp explained. We'll also play with wingers because I'm convinced of it. He didn't shy away from the ugly numbers either. He openly accepted that there are currently 11 nations ranked ahead of Germany in world football. But his entire philosophy hinges on one idea: you don't need a Dembélé to win if your collective intensity shatters the opposition. Success is performance versus expectations, he warned. We need a new set of expectations. My goal with the national team is that people go home after games saying, "Wow." And then came the warning. The red line. In a moment that silenced the room, Klopp laid out the absolute boundary regarding his personal life and the media's treatment of his family. Citing the harsh treatment of Julian Nagelsmann and former England boss Thomas Tuchel, he made it crystal clear. If you behave badly and don't leave my family in peace, then I'll be gone. I'll just turn away. I'm not doing this job for myself. I'm doing it for you. I love this job, but I am always ready to call it quits if need be. So, where does this leave Die Mannschaft? Jürgen Klopp isn't here for a quick fix. He has penned a massive 4-year deal that carries him through the 2028 European Championship and the 2030 World Cup. He's completely getting the old coaching setup, bringing in his trusted lieutenants from his Liverpool days, Peter Krawietz, Pepijn Lijnders, and Sven Bender. He is building his own fortress from the ground up. His very first test back on the touchline after 2 years away from management couldn't be more dramatic. Germany will face off against the Netherlands in the Nations League. And depending on how the Dutch FA moves, we could see Klopp staring down the touchline at Arne Slot, the very man who succeeded him at Anfield. 4 years. 2 massive tournaments. And 1 incredibly public statement about exactly what his squad lacks. Jürgen Klopp didn't walk into Frankfurt and promise the German people a trophy. He didn't promise them that they magically have a Kylian Mbappé hiding in their academy. He promised them a system, a work ethic, and an identity that will give them a fighting chance anyway. The talking is over. Now it's on the pitch where that promise gets tested.